Well, good morning. Happy Tuesday to you. We continue our study reading through the Gospel of Matthew, the different healing passages. When you get to chapter 8, you can see healing after healing after healing, that this is a section in which the Gospel writer Matthew sort of pulls all of these healing stories together, or multiple healing stories together into one. And so the first is that Jesus cleanses a leper. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 8. I'm going to start reading in verse 1. When Jesus had come down from the mountain, great crowds followed him, and there was a leper who came to him and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, if you choose, you can make me clean." He stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I do choose. Be made clean." Immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Then Jesus said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them." This story's, I think one of the intriguing parts of this story is that the leper says, "If you so choose, make me clean." And Jesus says, "I do choose." Which is an interesting thought. You know, part of the reality for folks who in that day had leprosy is that they were often left out, right? Leprosy was this skin disease, and maybe is contagious in different ways, and they were really relegated to the exteriors of the city, outside the gates. People didn't want them around. It was very visible, and for most part, people chose not to be with them. And here the leper is asking Jesus to choose the opposite, and Jesus does. There's a reality with many illnesses that it may be something that is happening to our body, maybe even inside of our bodies, but there's a physical manifestation of that illness on the outside. And people can see it, and people immediately know that you are sick, or that there's something wrong, or that there's something different about you. And different, that scares us as much as wrong and sick scare us. And so people get left out and pushed out to the margins. And that's where the leper had been in his life. And so he asks Jesus, "If you choose." And as I said, most people had chosen not to be with that leper. And not so much today with leprosy, but you think of the AIDS epidemic a number of years ago, and how many people, what kind of disassociation people did with those who had HIV/AIDS, and the kind of stepping away from those folks that happened. I wonder what happens when you are that person who has an illness, and what you see is everyone around you backing away. That there comes another kind of sickness that, which is not only the physical, but now there's a social and an emotional and a spiritual sickness, because you're being isolated. And here Jesus, God in the form of Jesus, says, "I'm not leaving you. I'm not isolating you like the others." I think we even saw some of that in the pandemic. There's been stories about people who were persecuting or sort of pushing out people of Asian descent, because the idea that this pandemic originated in Asia, and we saw some terrible racist actions early on, especially about people who were pushing Asians away and trying to isolate them. It's a kind of sickness that reared its head in those moments that we needed healing from. It also makes me think of folks, sometimes we might have good friends or acquaintances, and I've heard this a lot from folks that, their loved one, their spouse gets sick and people don't know what to say. It's like your spouse is sick and everyone knows that your spouse is terminal and people don't know what to say. They're uncomfortable. They feel pain for you. They're sad. They're sorrowful. But asking, how are you doing? I'm doing terrible. My spouse is sick and suffering. And so I've seen too many times in which friends and acquaintances will just sort of drift away from those who are sick, not because they're afraid of them, but because they just don't know what to say or what to do, and there's nothing that they can say or do. And the answer is in this passage, because God's healing comes to this man through Jesus' choice to be present with him. If you so choose, yes, I do. For those who are sick, if we so choose to be present with them, some kind of healing can happen. For those around us who are sick and suffering, if rather than sort of slinking away in sadness or an intimidation of what to say, if we so choose to be present with them. Sometimes when people are sick, it can be hard to be with them because everything is about them, because they're constantly talking about their illness, because every time you're with them that you're sort of caring. We're used to relationships. We're used to relationships that are sort of give and take, and a relationship can turn, and so then the person who's sick is always taking, and that can be exhausting. And I've seen people step out of those relationships as well because they're exhausted, and certainly the caretakers and those who are well need to take care of themselves. But the question, if you so choose, Jesus says, I do so choose, and I will be present with you. And so I'm thinking today about who, perhaps in my life, that I can be present to, who is sick in some way, and today, in a particular way, I can be present with them. And maybe by my presence with them, God can bring about some kind of healing through that presence. Won't you think about that with me today? God bless. Have a good day.